Another day of deliberations in the Menendez corruption trial. What would happen also in the U.S. Senate if the New Jersey Democrat were to be convicted? Right now, Republicans, they hold a slim 52-48 margin in the Senate, as you know. And as we all know here, every vote counts with a lot of huge legislative battles that have already happened in the first year of the Trump presidency. So if Menendez needs to be replaced before Phil Murphy is sworn in next year, and I don't think that's going to happen, Chris Christie would be the one to appoint his successor. Of course, he would pick a Republican. But it is not a given, first of all, that Menendez gets convicted, but even if he were, that he'd get booted from the Senate. Here's how Politico explains this, and this is all about math. Republicans need a 2/3 majority in the Senate to agree to expel a member, which means they would need Democratic votes. I'm talking about 15 of them here. With partisan tensions as high as they are, Democrats still bitter that Republicans denied President Obama's Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland a seat last year, let alone hearings, among a host of other issues. There is no mood, one would believe, to cooperate with the GOP majority when they know that it would just be 2 months before Phil Murphy goes from governor-elect to the sitting governor, and he would appoint and pick, one would presume, a Democrat here. So trust me, barring something that I cannot foresee, in no way, shape, or form will Menendez be replaced before January. And even then, I fully expect if he is convicted, and that's an if, he'd appeal. All right, back to the law, though, and to the case. In Newark, the jury gone for the day and set to head back to the jury room tomorrow morning. Dominic Carter, he's been at the courthouse since the court case started, and he's been there to the bitter end or towards the end. Here he is with the latest.
And good evening to you, Richard. It is starting to look like this jury is hunkering down, like they are going to be here for a few days, possibly going into next week. Richard, this day started with traffic. The senator arrived and heard the message from jurors to federal judge William Walls complaining of horrendous traffic when they leave. Judge Walls shortened each day to end at 3:30 p.m. During deliberations, Menendez is either inside a courthouse conference room or in the area nearby. Deliberations have gone on for several days now, Senator.
9 weeks, 60 witnesses, thousands of pages, hundreds of documents. The jury has a lot to go through. And so I understand that they are being methodical, I would suspect. I think that they are trying to be erstwhile to their oath. So time for me is, after 2.5 years of living through this odyssey, waiting for the jury to do what they think is right, is not something I worry about. And I have every expectation that, based upon all of the facts that have been presented at this trial, if they listen to the law and the facts, I'm convinced we will be exonerated, and that's worth waiting for. Thank you.
3 days into deliberations, the jury has not asked for any readbacks of testimony. Prosecutors allege Menendez co-defendant, wealthy Florida eye doctor Solomon Melgen, directed $750,000 in political contributions to entities connected to Menendez, paid for luxury vacations in Paris and the Dominican Republic for the senator, and flights for Menendez on Melgen's private jet. And the reason why we may be here for a few days, if jurors don't reach a verdict by tomorrow night, Judge Walls says he'll excuse a juror who has a scheduled vacation and replace her with an alternate. And so, Richard, this panel would start deliberations all over again from scratch, starting next week. At the federal courthouse in Newark, I'm Dominic Carter. Richard, let's go back to you in the studio.
Thank you. A lot of questionable timing issues with jurors coming, going when trial shuts down, but that for another day. Okay. You thought it was interesting, Doug, that there has been no readbacks been requested by the jury. I know it's always dangerous to read the tea leaves, but I want to take the audience into the two different rooms right now. Let's first start with the jury room. What do we usually take if they want to have instructions read back to them, if they want to have readbacks of certain testimony, if they have questions about definitions? The more or less they do, what does that usually tell you?
It doesn't really tell you much. I mean, every lawyer that tries cases tries to figure out what the jury is doing back there, and at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter because they come to a decision that may or may not follow what they're doing by the notes. But usually there's a school of thought that when a jury goes back there, they first take an informal vote on what everybody will do, and then sometimes they'll go through all the evidence, or other times they'll kind of point out what they want to point out. But it really, at the end of the day, these jurors can look at this case any way they want to and go through the evidence any way they want to. There's no set way of doing it.
There's an informal belief that Friday is a lot of time you get verdicts because the jury doesn't want to be there on the weekend. They're human beings after all.
There's no doubt about that.
Right. And they know that if they don't get a verdict by tomorrow, they're going to have to do this all over again with another juror. That said, the longer they deliberate, usually the greater chance, Jimmy, that there's going to be a hung jury?
You know, it's hard to tell in federal court. Hung juries are foretold more from notes. You know, you deliberate for 3 or 4 days and you get a note that says we're hung, we can't agree, and so on and so forth. That's an indication. But when you have this long a trial with this many witnesses, you have no idea what they're doing in there. They could have taken the indictment, they could have gone count by count. They could be just talking about certain things. They could be focusing on one count. They could be focusing on one issue. You've got 2 defendants, you need separate verdicts. It's a long time.
Okay, now let me get into the other room. Mayo, you're with your client. You spent nearly 3 months here. His freedom is literally on the line. First of all, is there any conversations while there's deliberations going on between the prosecution and the defense that maybe before they come back with a verdict, can we work out a plea? And secondly, do you just try and keep your client's mind on other things, or do you already start preparing an appeal while you're waiting for the jury to come back? Give me an idea what's going on in the defendant's room.
I think you're preparing for appeal from the time you begin trial, even before that. You know, your motion practice well in advance of trial. Everything that you do on the defense side prepares your client for the most effective appeal. You look for any error you can find. But
do you try and pump up your client, or do you want them to expect the worst and be surprised by the best?
Well, I think that if you're doing your job, you always prepare your client for the worst. It's no different than going to a doctor before surgery. You know, you don't go in and tell them everything's going to be fine, even though you may think that it would be. But you have to let them know that the possible issues are, you know, everything from A to Z. But
when they say, "Hey, Mayo, does it look good? What do you think my chances are?" Do you tell them the truth, or even if you think they're going to get off, do you say it could go either way?
I think that you hope that your case goes in as cleanly as possible. And if you've done everything you can do and your case goes in and the jury gets to hear the version that you want them to hear and it goes in, you didn't miss anything, you've done the best you can do, then you have to have faith that the jury's going to be able to look at it.
You're talking the prosecution in these while they're deliberating?
In cases where I think that we have issues and I think that we may lose, yeah, absolutely. And also, sometimes the prosecution comes to us and says, hey, listen, would you contemplate taking a plea?
Yeah, but not in federal court. It's so hard in federal court because of the guidelines. In state court, you take a lesser charge, you get 1 1/3 to 4 on a murder. It's very hard in federal court.
And in state court, you can talk to the judge about what he or she might do.
I want to save what time I got left here because 3 attorneys and we got 3 stories. Lightning round here straight ahead. Stay with us.